Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Anay Sim, and today I'm being joined by Lauren Feld. Lauren is the head of growth at 3Box Labs, which is the team behind Ceramic Network, the infrastructure for decentralized data and identity management. I'm super excited to have Lauren with us here today and to dive into this whole idea of sovereign data, the open web, and what Ceramic is doing within this field. So thanks so much for joining me, Lauren.
I am so excited to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So thank you for having me.
I'm so pumped to hear that. Okay, so before we dive into there's a lot of fun stuff to cover, but want to learn a bit more about you. What's your background and how you fell down the crypto rabbit hole and found yourself where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like I had kind of a maybe more atypical path. For me, I first heard of blockchain. I'm not technical at all. I was a psychology major. And it was actually funny because my father is a programmer, and growing up, he always tried to get my sister and I to be super technical, and we did not get it. We were not into it. And now we both work at tech startups. But basically, when I graduated, my first job was in strategic consulting at Deloitte. And I was actually working mostly in the healthcare space. And the way that I first heard about blockchain was I had a client that we were working for. It was a large national health plan. So think like Anthem, Aetna, some of these like big national providers. And they came to us asking, hey, we want to do a customer rewards program, and we think we want to do it on blockchain. How would that work? And so being the analyst, 2 months into the job, they were like, hey, you go figure this out. None of us know what this means. And I had no idea I had never heard of blockchain before as a technology. And I started learning, definitely fell down the rabbit hole. I started watching a million YouTube videos. And then I found out we had a blockchain lab at Deloitte. And one day I was actually just walking around the office and I saw a room. And outside there was kind of the reservation, and it said Deloitte Blockchain Lab. I just knocked on the door, opened it up and introduced myself and said, hey, I'm super interested. I'd love to work with you guys. And so I started doing work for them just kind of nights and weekends wherever I could. They ended up asking me to join full time. So I joined the Deloitte Blockchain Lab, and we were working with Deloitte's, Fortune 500 clients, a lot of these huge kind of enterprise companies, trying to help them figure out their blockchain strategy. So doing a lot of work in actually supply chain, oil and gas, it really spanned the gamut. And from there, I ended up getting an offer to join Consensus in their ventures group. So Consensus is an Ethereum venture production studio, kind of one of the biggest blockchain startups in the space. Started helping them to kind of diligence and find projects to bring into the incubator, working with our spokes. So there were kind of close to 70 or 80 projects that we called spokes, which we were incubating at the time, helping them to figure out their strategy, mostly around go-to-market. And then from there, really felt like I wanted to do something early stage, joined Techstars, left the blockchain space for a minute, was working as part of the Barclays Techstars program. So all fintechs, met a mentor from R3, went back into the blockchain space, more on the enterprise side this time, but also in this kind of venture program. All the while, I kept in touch with 3Box from our time together at Consensus. And then Danny, one of our co-founders and COO, reached out to me to kind of join as the first business hire. So I joined 6 months ago, and it's just been a crazy ride. So definitely a very windy path, but been in the blockchain space for the last 5 or 6 years.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like I hear a lot of those stories. There's no perfect way to get here. It's a super windy path for sure. And I also love how, you don't come from a super technical background. I'm also studying psychology at school. So I love that we share that. But, you still are such a meaningful contributor to this space. So super excited to dive deeper into this with you. To start off, kind of want to start off with a bit of a broader question, but curious to see the angle and perspective that you take on it. That being, what does Web3 mean to you?
Yeah, big question. I think when I think about
question.
Yeah, big question. I think I really think about what a lot of the core problems that we're trying to deal with at Ceramic. Because I think blockchain is more general. People just think about decentralizing, democratizing access, and Web3 is about that too. But very much the meaning is Web 3.0, right? The next iteration of the internet. And so that brings me to these really interesting projects like Handshake and ENS that are really trying to decentralize the way that the internet is set up today. And there's kind of two elements of that. So one is the approach that they're taking, which is We have these domain name systems like, GoDaddy, and that's basically what map these IP addresses of websites to human readable names. And those are all really like controlled by this huge company called Icon, which really has like a monopoly today. And people have to pay like $180,000 to get access to these new top level domains. And so really, even though people think of the internet as being open, it's actually very centralized. There's like a handful of players that really own these registries that help people access and kind of like own these digital locations of the internet. And that's one side. And the other side is what we're doing at Ceramic, which is really about decentralizing data. So if we think about Web 2.0, there are all these companies, they have centralized servers, they kind of own user data, and oftentimes they profit off of like monetizing that information, often unbeknownst to or kind of at the like disadvantage of their end users. And I think that's like very much at the core of what Ceramic is doing, is trying to like uproot that. So for me, Web 3.0 is like, how do we change the internet away from being something that is seemingly decentralized to actually at its core and architecturally being open, is kind of the Web 3.0.
Yeah, for sure. Getting back to that original genesis of the internet, which was meant to be a decentralized network.
Yes.
So we touched on, you touched a bit on Ceramic in that answer, but just to hammer on it a bit more clearly, at a basic level, could you describe to listeners what Ceramic is and what are the problems that you guys are trying to solve?
Yes, 100%. Ceramic is a developer tool, so it's very technical. And so depending on the audience, I always try to figure out kind of the right way to shape it. So maybe I'll hit it in a few different ways so that it will resonate with different people that are listening. So one is we talk about Ceramic as being this kind of core infrastructure, and really it's a protocol for first decentralized data storage. So if you're familiar with IPFS, we are actually built on top of IPFS, but adding in that element of mutability. So on IPFS, once you store something, it's immutable. That's a huge part of the value proposition. But there are many use cases where you actually want mutability. So especially if you think of user-generated content or user data, we might want to potentially, be able to delete or change our information. So you need that mutable aspect. And then the second part is kind of the identity management piece. So how do we think about, everyone's talking about decentralized identity. It's such a buzzword. But really, like, the concept is just how do you manage user data in a decentralized fashion? It's hard to do. And how do you think about identity in Web3? Right now, most people think about an identity as being kind of like a wallet address, which is really fragile, right? Like, everyone knows lose your keys, you lose your data. So that's a really fragile system. And we're basically trying to build a less fragile system where essentially you can have a higher level identifier of your identity and actually link multiple accounts and wallets together. So if you do lose access to one, you don't lose access to your data. Or if one account is compromised, you still have access. So that's kind of like the more technical side. But at a high level, I think we're trying to solve two main problems. And one is kind of on the user side, is this idea of what we're trying to create, this kind of new category around sovereign data. So we think of users, I talked before about, companies own your data. People think about like Facebooks and a lot of these big monoliths. They have all of our information, and oftentimes it's really hard to get access. Like, have you ever tried to go and download your Facebook data? They like make it so hard to do to actually get, like, if I want to see all of my comments or my history.
It's such a pain.
Such a pain, and unreasonably so. But it's my information. But really, like, it just brings to bear how much we do not control most of our information that lives on the open web. So that's like from the user perspective, we're trying to create tools so that us end users, you and I, can actually own our own information and control who sees it and who accesses it, and when and for how long they do so. And then from the developer side, we're trying to make it easier for developers to build these decentralized data applications and manage user data in this open and decentralized fashion. And maybe to make that more clear, this might resonate more with developers, but our co-founder, Danny, talks about this a lot, and I think it just really helps kind of like drive the point home. If you think about a lot of applications today, there's kind of like three layers to it. And so one is the data layer. On top of that, you have kind of like the logic, and you can think of that as like services, and on top is the interface. So to make that concrete, I used this before in a previous podcast, but you can think of like Airbnb, right? You have your data, which is typically pretty persistent. It doesn't change. So you have all the houses that are on the platform, and then you have your logic. So let's say it's like the algorithm of how I know which kind of properties to show you based on where you're searching for, your background. And then I have the interface. So you can think of like the UI. And the UI and my algorithms, like, those change all the time, but the data is actually very persistent. But from a developer perspective, perspective, every time I create an application, I have to rebuild that data layer and rebuild all of like the management tooling to manage that open data layer. And what we're trying to do with Ceramic is actually just build a shared data layer. So instead of developers reinventing the wheel every time, they have this open shared data layer that everyone can pull from. And it really accelerates the application development process and just kind of gives us like this open infrastructure to pull from and develop a really strong kind of core together.
That's a part of ceramic that is really interesting to me and that I think is kind of revolutionary, and not having to rebuild the data layer. I think that there's going to be, you're going to see a lot more competition within the field of tech and a loss of power on behalf of these monopolies, which I think is a net benefit to society. But, just going a bit deeper into that, can you touch on, how Ceramic is open sourcing data models, and then also this concept of the composability of data? That's something I think is foreign to a lot of people and is kind of the big unlock that Ceramic offers, if I had to sum it up. So would love to hear more about what you have to say there.
Yes, I love that you brought that up and that you see that as being the core value, because we really see that as being a long-term vision of Ceramic. And it's kind of like the V2 of where we're going. So first is get people to write data on the network. And then V2 is how do we get everyone to share that data? And so to make it a little bit more clear, we talked again about the developer perspective. So I'll try to keep it a little bit more high level, but when developers are building applications and they're storing data, they have these kind of schemas and data models that describe the kind of data I'm storing. So you can think of a schema as like, a basic profile. And that schema will decide, well, what do I want in the profile? I probably want your name. I maybe want your address, your phone number. And today, again, when developers are building applications, every time they're often like reinventing the wheel. There's thousands or maybe millions of different basic profile schemas. And it's really hard for people to come together around consensus of, what's the best one or the right one for my application. And so what Ceramic is doing is, on this open data layer, we're creating this repository of data models where people can write and publish the data models they're using in this shared system. And once we have the token, which we don't have yet today on Ceramic, but once we issue that, there will be this incentive mechanism for people to basically upvote and say, hey, I use this basic profile schema. I think it's really powerful. Other people should use this too. And you can have this really strong signaling. And what's also really cool is we can actually start to reward the authors of those data models. So people who create really valuable data models will now be rewarded and compensated for people reusing that. But what this really enables, and this is like, probably hopefully the part that hits home to most of like the listeners here, is that if you start to convene around these shared data models, you actually have data that's very easy to make interoperable, right? And that's how we get to this composability element of, if everyone is writing using this shared kind of basic profile, and we all agree that that's like the right profile to use, let's say for, Web3 social platforms, as a new developer goes and creates an application, they don't have to have me when I log on create my new profile. They can actually just pull from this like profile data that I've already stored and written as Ceramic, and I as the user just permission them to access it. So it's really powerful because, developers and applications can start to share data across them. And that idea of composability is something that we really don't see at all today in Web 2, and is an extremely powerful kind of model that we're hoping to bring to fruition with Web3. And I think it just brings a really awesome user experience too, because developers now have to compete on things other than just kind of these data monopolies, and it becomes about competing on user experience.
Yeah, 100%. To me, this whole idea of interoperability is super important. I think a lot about, from the creator side of things. If I've built up my whole audience on Twitter, if I'm kicked off of Twitter or I lose the login to my account, et cetera, I lose that audience. So me being able to port my data in various places across the internet would be hugely beneficial. So I think that's a really good example of, the importance of what you guys are building at Ceramic. Backing up for a second. So I think that a lot of the people, they hear things like the open web, people are building on top of your data, et cetera, et cetera. There's some concerns that may arise around privacy of data. Can you address this concern? And, what kind of information should people be storing offline versus on a public ledger to be used by multiple parties?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Ceramic is at its core definitely like a public network. And so we always say, anything that's really sensitive, you should never store on a public network. Like that's just best practice. So if you have any like PHI or PII, any really sensitive personal data, that's probably not something you want to keep on Ceramic. That being said, so we do have low-level tooling for you to be able to encrypt data. So it's possible, if you want to encrypt information and store it on Ceramic, you can do that. We hope to have like better and stronger tooling around encryption in the future. So there are things that not everything has to be natively public that's on Ceramic, and we're creating more advanced permissioning systems so you can say who you want to be able to read your information and when or for how long. But again, still the best practice, anything super sensitive, you probably want to store offline, but you could use Ceramic as a pointer to say like, hey, I'm storing a proof that this sensitive data lives offline and it lives over here. Here's where you can find it. So we're seeing people, do things like that with use cases that have very sensitive data. But there's other ways that people are exploring like some elements of private use cases on Ceramic. So one that's common is people are using Ceramic, like I mentioned before, to do what we're calling multi-account identity, which is for me as an user to link different wallets and accounts and create this one unified version of like, I'm Lauren, I still own, all these different accounts, they belong to me. But in most cases, you want that to be public. But in some cases, you might want that to be private. So think about like an investment syndicate. I might not want people to know what I'm investing in or which accounts I own and where I'm sending my funds. So there are some accounts that are trying to explore this like private linking. And so that's something that we're working on. So there are some use cases that we're able to kind of unlock. But that's kind of like the general framework that I think about.
And I think that also makes me think about what we were kind of talking about a couple of minutes ago in terms of data ownership. Can you talk a bit more specifically about the individual control I have over my data within a network like Ceramic?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the idea behind Ceramic is that if I'm kind of the user, if an application wants to access my data, I basically have to permission or give them the ability to access and see that information. And one of the things that we're working right now is this new kind of object capability system. This is super technical. We just published a blog post if people want to learn more about it. I am definitely not the expert, but it's basically to allow this more granular advanced permissioning for me to say, hey, you can only see this data, not all of my information. There's a subset of data I want you to access and for this period of time. And we can start to get much more granular about this permissioning. That's something we're working on and rolling out right now, and we'll continue to it will be an evolution. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, there's a lot to be improved in that space. I'm used to the pop-ups on the apps on my phone now, but it's just a hassle. Even if I either accept all cookies and can get onto the site, or if I don't accept all cookies, and it takes me through a whole bunch of loopholes before I can actually access what I'm trying to. So I'm excited to see innovation there and, platforms that are prioritizing our protection and the value of our data, and not just ripping us off. So something that's really interesting to me about Ceramic is the way I interpret it is kind of like you guys are building a community for developers, and there's a host of benefits that streamline off of that. But, is that correct? What do you perceive as the community that you're currently building at 3Box Labs in Ceramic, and how do you hope to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's correct. Like most of our community right now are developers because they're the ones that are building and using our tooling, which is awesome. But we do have people in our community that are just excited about the mission of sovereign data. Like they're more drawn to this mission, like we were talking about, of, hey, I don't want these companies to own and monetize information. I care about data privacy. So we have people who are just more aligned to the mission in our community. And we're definitely working on, like, if we're talking about where do we see it evolving, we are thinking a lot as a team right now about what are the programs or like the tooling that we can put in place to help people who are non-technical folks be able to actually contribute to our community. So, establishing something more similar to an ambassador program, which we've seen in other communities and ecosystems for people who maybe just want to do community building and they want to help like greet and direct people and provide support for people in the community, or who want to lead events, or, be on our monthly community call, or write content, help with social media. There's so many other elements besides just like the technical, like engineering core work that we're doing to build this network. And so we know that we need to provide our community and people better avenues and ideas and ways to contribute and be rewarded for those contributions. But we're just still early stages in that, but hopefully something that we'll have early this year.
And on this thread, I'm curious. So Are a lot of the developers within your community crypto native? Are you increasingly seeing Web2 developers transition into this space? Slash, do
Yeah.
you think that, the systems and products that Ceramic is building would be adopted by Web2 companies? Do you see that world ahead of us?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think we've seen an evolution. Like in the beginning, definitely a lot of the companies that came to us, or sorry, developers that come to us are like very experienced Web3 engineers. Maybe they tried building on IPFS, but they need that mutability element, or they know they want to build a decentralized data application. And so they kind of come and naturally find and use Ceramic. We start to see more Web2 developers who are coming over and they want to build a decentralized application. They're not sure how, or the tooling that's available is like kind of hard to get started with and to use. So our kind of tooling that we provided has made it easier for them to kind of quick start and set up some sort of DApp. So that's been awesome to see. And, something we're thinking about is how do we continue to make it accessible and how do we convey and position Ceramic to Web2 developers. One thing we talk about, people ask us, like, is Ceramic a decentralized database? And previously, we've kind of shied away and said, not really, because we don't want to confuse people. One of the core limitations of Ceramic today is that we don't have advanced querying native in the network, which is something most developers would expect with any database tooling. It's something that we definitely, will have in the future. It's a huge thing that we're thinking about. We're working with the graph to kind of add that querying onto the network. But now I think when we really talk about Web2 developers, like that's the best analogy, right? Like they need an analogy to something they know and where does Ceramic fit in the stack. And that really is like one of the more analogous comparisons. So yeah, I think that would answer the first part of your question. And the second was, would Web2 companies use Ceramic? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
I think so. And I think like you just think about one of the biggest challenges for companies right now is like data privacy and data security. And like some of the biggest companies in the world, like pretty much all of them have been hacked at some point in time. Like, we've seen Equifax that hacked, the Facebook hack, Yahoo, like literally there's like this huge list of how many companies and how many like millions or billions of like users' information have been leaked and hacked and now like is in the dark web somewhere and people are like using all of our identities. Like, there's probably a million more in Feld out there now. And I think it's really difficult for companies. It's expensive, it's costly, and it's difficult to do when you're kind of like owning and have to keep, safe harbor over all this information. So I think that like from that standpoint, there is a big draw for companies to start to decentralize because it is more secure architecturally. But I also think that it's like there's an user pull, like more and more companies. You've seen Google make a lot of changes because people were crying out about data privacy and feeling like they were being taken advantage of. They've made changes. Apple has made changes. Some of the biggest tech companies in the world are shifting to be more privacy minded. That being said, do I think that Google and Apple are going to disintermediate themselves? Probably not. But I think that there will be Web2 companies that are smart and they see kind of where the puck is going. And rather than kind of like, be the old story of like Canon and Kodak who weren't able to kind of evolve with like that wave of the tech evolution, I think there will be other players that see where it's going and they work to kind of build new infrastructure that meets that kind of user need.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like you're saying, I think it's also a big cultural shift on the consumer side of things. So will be interesting to see how the traditional Web2 companies react and the technology that they're willing and able to adopt because of that. So kind of just to wrap things up a bit on Ceramic and really put things into perspective here, would love for you to talk about how companies are using Ceramic and what are the most exciting use cases that you see today?
Yeah, I mean, so Ceramic is definitely like this general purpose tool in a way, being like a data layer for Web3. So there's lots of different use cases. I'll hit on like a couple of them. Obviously, being on down the rabbit hole, we got to talk about the rabbit hole integration. That's one I'm super excited about. Rabbit Hole and also the team at Figment Learn, which is doing something similar to Rabbit Hole, just in the sense of trying to onboard new users and developers to Web3, are both using Ceramic to do this user profile piece. So like I mentioned, if you think about Rabbit Hole and long-term building up these skills and credentials, if you have it tied to one wallet and you lose access, it's a really negative user experience. And also you want your holistic kind of like, your LinkedIn is like an aggregation of all your different experiences over your career. similarly, your profile should be an aggregation of like different skills and credentials that you, like as a Nay, have earned, no matter like what wallet you've used or like what profile you're using to access them. So I think having that like multi-account identity for profiles, when you think long term about adding together skills and credentials and building reputation over time in Web3 is really important. We're also seeing that a lot in the DAO community is, a lot of DAOs have kind of like reached a tipping point where they have a lot of people. They don't really want to keep letting in, just anyone to their community. So they want to make sure they're letting in people that are valuable. Building this kind of like cross ecosystem reputation systems on Ceramic is powerful so that they can see, hey, here's what I've done over here. Here's kind of the history, and it's all has this kind of like immutable audit trail that you get on blockchain tech is really cool. Another thing that we've seen is companies just using Ceramic as like a decentralized data store. So if you think another good example is Boardroom. So they're doing kind of like proposals and commenting systems for DAOs. So people will go on and now using Ceramic, all of my comments across different proposals will be stored with me as an user. So it's stored in a fully decentralized fashion, which is super cool. We're seeing people do similar things in terms of that or like decentralized data storage with NFTs. So using Ceramic, you can actually have either an NFT or a Gnosis Safe right now. And so Gnosis Safe, for those who don't know, is a multi-signature wallet, which means instead of just having one person sign, you need X number, let's say 3 of 5 people on that wallet to sign in order to execute a transaction. And so Gnosis Safe is this very standard kind of framework for a lot of DAOs today, where they manage treasury, because obviously it'd be very difficult if you had one person who could sign and move millions of dollars. So using Ceramic, you can have either a Gnosis Safe or an NFT itself, like that asset, control and write data to Ceramic. So that unlocks some really cool use cases. With Gnosis Safe for DAOs, people can have these like now org profiles. So DAO profiles where you need multiple people to sign off to update, the charter of what the DAO is doing. Or let's say there's an org directory and you want to know who are the different working group leads, what are they doing? Again, that's something you probably want more than one person to update. You don't want to do it on chain. It's costly and expensive to make those changes. So doing it on Ceramic is a great alternative. And similarly with NFT, DID, which is kind of the method behind this system I was mentioning before in terms of being able to store data on Ceramic. Maybe I won't go down there. It's probably a little too technical, but with NFTs, what you can do is actually store the metadata related to the NFT or the JPEG itself on Ceramic and then have that mutability. So what you could do is every time a new person purchases that NFT, I could have something like an address book where I add my name and kind of why I think it's interesting that what prompted me to purchase that asset. Or we can have this like generative art where every new owner gets to actually change what the art looks like, or the artist itself could change the art over time as it changes hands. So many different use cases. I would say they really center again around like decentralized data storage or user identity and wanting to be able to store user data in this decentralized fashion. I could talk about more use cases, but hopefully that gives like a good sense of some of the ones that I think are really exciting.
Yeah, so exciting. And I think that the last point you were talking about, the NFTs, for example, that kind of alludes to why Ceramic having dynamic data streams is so important, being able to update that information. Little biased, but I'm super excited about the identity side of things and really this aggregation of your on-chain activity traced back to your decentralized identifier. So super excited to see all the innovation that's happening there and for this vision to really become a reality. And we touched on that a bit, in terms of steps that need to be taken for Ceramic to achieve the future that it is hoping to step into. But if you want to, clarify that a bit more, what does the future of Ceramic look like and what still needs to be done to make that vision a reality?
Yeah. I mean, I think like so many tech like platforms in the space, we're still early on. There's a lot of work that we need to do to make the platform itself scalable and to serve a lot of different use cases well. But I would say like at a high level, this year is going to be a huge year for us. We have a bunch of like really critical milestones that we need to hit. Obviously one, like I mentioned before, is issuing our FIRE token, which I love. In case people haven't got it, there's like a whole branding element here. Ceramic, you have our fire token, and then glaze is what we call our tooling. So just to kind of, not everyone always understands how those three things kind of map together. So launching the token is obviously like hugely critical for a ton of reasons, but the main one is to have this native incentive mechanism on the network. So eventually over time, if I'm going to store data, I also need someone to persist that data. So now with the token, I can pay peer-to-peer for someone else in the network to persist my data for me. So that is really critical. And there's other uses of the token, but that's kind of the main one I'd highlight. The other is creating the ceramic foundation. So actually creating the DAO for ceramic, which is going to be a major piece of work that I'm super excited about. We'll have to learn from y'all over at Rabbit Hole who have started doing this and doing this well. But that's something I'm really excited about. And I'd say like the other piece is there's definitely like some, I guess the core deliverable maybe on the engineering side is actually introducing the ceramic blockchain. So today what we do is we actually don't have a ceramic blockchain, and we have kind of this ceramic, the way that the platform is architected is every time you kind of update data on ceramic, you have a new commit. And then what we do is we batch a whole bunch of commits together and we anchor it on chain to Ethereum so that you have a strict ordering of events in case of any dispute resolution. And what we're working on right now is actually creating the ceramic blockchain so that we can get rid of that concept of anchoring altogether. And that will be really exciting because the core value of the ceramic blockchain is that it's going to be built and specifically designed for web scale data as opposed to value. Like most, layer one platforms that you think of today, Ethereum, Bitcoin are really designed for value, and ceramic is designed for data. So excited for that. So those are three like major things that we need to do in the next 11 months. So I'm excited. And then obviously just always core, like improving security and performance of the network, adding new features, adding better tooling and improving our tooling. Those are all like always ongoing things we'll continue to work on. But I think those three things are like major kind of milestones that we got hit this year.
Yeah, that's super exciting. A lot going on. Super excited for you guys. And then just to put this into a bit more clarity for people who may not be as familiar with the token model and why it's so important. So when Ceramic releases its token, that will give developers more of an incentive to back up their information onto Ceramic. Would you add anything else?
Yeah, so I would say like the way that it works right now is you can store data on Ceramic. But we use this concept from IPFS where you have these on Ceramic, you have streams of data and you basically will pin other kind of like streams or nodes that you want to follow. So specific data that you're interested in kind of maintaining. But as Ceramic evolves, basically every time you have, or maybe to put it this way, if I want to actually find the current state of a specific stream ID, so the Ceramic network will really kind of just persist the current state. But there are many cases where you actually want to actually have that entire audit trail of changes over time. So you want to back up that data, that kind of like historical stream of data somewhere else. And you can do that. And, people do that today on either like something like Filecoin or Arweave or an S3 bucket, like a traditional Web2 data store. Once we introduce the token, the idea will be that you can actually pay people natively in Fire token to kind of like persist that data for you. Instead of kind of worrying about doing that yourself. So that's one angle. There will be other elements of the token as well. We're going to be publishing our white paper probably in the next couple of months, and that will go into kind of all the token mechanics and the different uses. There will be, other kind of costs associated with the network in terms of, obviously there will be validator rewards and things like that. So more to come with the white paper publication.
For sure. We'll keep my eyes peeled for that. Super excited for you guys. Thank you so much for running us through this, from both a high level and also getting a bit more into the technical weeds. Hopefully our listeners, whoever they are, whatever skill set they're coming from, were able to take something from this episode. Lauren, you don't know this, I don't think, but something that we've been doing with each guest at the end of every episode is little this or that type segment. So if you're willing, I've prepared some questions for you. So basically it's just rapid fire, going to give you two options, and first reaction, you're going to choose your preference. Does that make sense?
I love this. It's like Bravo. Do you ever watch the Andy Cohen show on Bravo? And he plays these little games. I'm so excited. Let's do it.
Yes, I love Andy Cohen. Did you see his New Year's segment?
No. Oh, I heard about it though. Like now he's banned from doing live TV or from CNN because he got drunk and called that Anderson Cooper, right? I did
Yeah,
see
I
that.
think he was just like I think he was just wasted on stage and was streaming. He was saying a lot of things, but it was really funny. If any of you guys haven't seen it, you definitely should.
Oh,
Okay, this or that, rapid fire. Okay, ready?
ready.
Okay, Web3 or crypto?
Web3.
ETH or Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Discord or Telegram?
Uh, I gotta say Telegram just because I don't know. I have a lot of issues with Discord. There's like so much functionality that needs to be added, and I'm just angry that it's not there yet. So I got Telegram is just better user experience, but less functionality.
Okay. Bear market or bull?
Goal baby.
New York or Chicago?
New York, always. Even though I did
Always.
go to Northwestern, so I've got deep roots in Chicago as well. But I will always be bullish on New York as the best city in the world.
That's why I did the Chicago one. I did a little LinkedIn stalking of you
Oh,
and found the Northwestern.
I see that.
Okay. Enterprise blockchain or crypto native projects?
Crypto native projects. I used to always try and talk about all the exciting things on the enterprise side, but now being like deep into the crypto native stuff, I'm just like, this is so much more exciting. It's so much more innovative. Enterprise blockchain is just a lot of operational efficiency, and there's like a time and place for that, but it's just way less sexy.
Yeah, yeah, I'd have to agree. Work from home or in office?
Work from home, game changer.
Vlogging or tweeting?
I think I like blogging. I don't really do either, but as you know, I'm trying to get into crypto Twitter, kind of unsuccessfully, but that's one of my 2022 goals.
Yes, and we're gonna plug it at the end. YouTube or TikTok?
I gotta say YouTube because that's where I've like learned all about crypto, and I actually don't have TikTok or Instagram or social media. So
Really, Lauren? I didn't know that. Okay. We also have to get your YouTube resources after this.
here.
ETH Denver or NFT NYC?
I think ETH Denver. I just went to NFT NYC last year, but I've never been to ETH Denver. But I think NFT NYC is just like so, obviously NFT focused. It's just like one narrow kind of myopic use case. And ETH Denver, from what I hear, is much more builder focused. So it's really about like
Mm-hmm.
developer focused, hackathon, creating new projects. So I'm so excited. I'll be there next month. If anyone's going to be there, definitely come find me.
Yes, 100%. We have to hang. Okay, before you go, I do want to hear about these YouTube resources, if it could be helpful for any other listeners. Like when you were first learning about the space, what kind of things really helped you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I don't have like a specific person or channel that I would share, but I'm just like definitely in a visual learner. And for me, like watching and like Googling and YouTubing a million different videos and just falling down the rabbit hole of like the recommendations on the side. And I'd hear someone in a video mention a concept that I didn't understand. And then I just like watch 10 more YouTube videos about it. And it was one way easier for me to just digest. There are lots of like graphics with it. But also just way like faster time to value in terms of being able to understand these very technical topics than reading white papers or something where it's incredibly dense and you have to get through like 30 pages maybe to get to the one sentence that hits for you. So yeah, I just find YouTube to be a really good way. Like even now when I'm confused about something, I'll just go, YouTube a quick video and I just think it's an incredible learning resource.
Yeah, I 100% agree, especially for the more technical side of things. Those is graphical a word? Those graphic elements really help out. Shameless plug for Rabbit Hole's YouTube account. If you guys are interested in learning more, we are definitely in the process of creating a ton of those explainer type videos. So hopefully there will be some helpful content on there. Last but not least, Lauren, where can people find you? You're going to be at ETH Denver. You're going to have a lot of fans there.
Yeah.
Anywhere else? I know we're in the Twitter rebrand stage. If you want to plug your Twitter.
Yes. Okay. Definitely. I'm on Twitter. My handle's Web3Lauren. I will be at ETH Denver, so definitely DM me if you're going to be around. We're going to also 3Boxes throwing a couple of events there. We're also going to be focusing, or we're going to be throwing an event there focused on women and non-binary and crypto. So would love to see some people come out for that. I'm based in Brooklyn and also I've spent a lot of time in Atlanta. So if people are around either of those two cities, always down for a meetup, for a hang, for a drink. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for Lauren for coming on. You've taught me and I hope the listeners so much. And until next time, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.